Since last year, the US has imposed sanctions and pressure on China on an almost insane scale. They have restricted exports of high-performance graphics processors from NVIDIA to block Chinese AI computing power, formed a three-nation alliance with Japan and the Netherlands to cut off semiconductor hardware shipments to China, and used billions of dollars in subsidies to lure TSMC to the US in an attempt to turn Taiwan's TSMC into ASMC. Now, finally, China has had enough. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you. Beginning this year, China began a series of intense counter-sanctions with just 3 moves that the Americans could not resist. Recently, during his visit to China, Elon Musk publicly spoke out against unleashing US behavior, and NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang bluntly stated there's only one Chinese market in the world, and we can't do without it. China's first step is restriction. They have restricted exports of major technologies. In February of this year, the Ministry of Commerce updated the catalog of technologies prohibited or restricted for export and included technologies related to photovoltaic silicon and technologies related to rare earth metals in the list of controlled goods subject to restricted exports. The second step, a ban. In March of this year, China's Cybersecurity Audit Office began investigating Micron, and the investigation found significant security risks in Micron's products that could affect national security. As a result, Micron was banned for purchasing critical components. In essence, Micron is being used by the US to suppress China. The suppression of Fujin Jinhua and Hefei Changxin was only initiated after Micron's report and lobbying activities. US companies with such ulterior motives should have been banned long ago. The third step is the penalty. U.S. military giants Lockheed Martin and Raytheon have repeatedly sold weapons to Taiwan, often crossing China's lower border. As a result, China listed them as unreliable organizations and fined them twice as much as the amount of their sales to Taiwan, which amounts to almost 100 billion yuan. Raytheon was required to pay the fine within 15 days, or a harsher penalty would have been imposed. However, they did not take this seriously and continued to sell weapons to Taiwan even more aggressively. In March, the U.S. Congress added more than $600 million in arms exports to Taiwan, including air-to-air missiles and anti-radiation missiles, which is extremely presumptuous. At the beginning of the sanctions, Raytheon said they would not be affected by the sanctions, but just a few months later, their CEO Hayes did a 180-degree U-turn, saying that they couldn't do without the Chinese market. So what happened? First of all, as Hayes pointed out, more than 95% of the rare earth materials are mined or processed in China. He admitted that Raytheon can't completely sever its ties with China because it would take the US many years to build a supply chain of rare earth materials without Chinesization. Looking at the timeline, the reason Hayes softened his stance 4 months later is probably because Raytheon's inventory of rare earths and other raw materials has reached a critical low point. Raytheon probably found itself in a situation where it had no resources to work with. Also, with the escalating conflict between Russia and Ukraine, now is a good time for Raytheon to cash in on the war. So can Hayes afford to be patient? Second, the frequent sanctions imposed by China's Ministry of Commerce on U.S. companies have made Raytheon realize that China is serious. Although Raytheon's military business is independent of the mainland market, its subsidiaries Pratt & Whitney and Collins Aerospace are heavily dependent on the mainland market. They have more than 2,000 employees in China and are involved in the development of Chinese large aircraft. In addition, when Raytheon merged with United Technologies also had many businesses in China, including elevator services, avionics, and engines. As one of the largest markets in the world, China has enormous appeal and potential for multinational technology companies. However, the Chinese government's regulatory efforts have also increased accordingly. Some non-compliant companies or those engaged in illegal activities have been punished accordingly. The reason Raytheon did so was mainly because they enjoyed U.S. support and mistakenly believed that even if they lost the mainland Chinese market, it would not affect the company's business. A few months later, Raytheon paid the fine. There is no relevant news at this time, the only report being that Raytheon announced it was laying off nearly 20,000 people the day after China imposed sanctions, and there have been no other reports since then. Hayes noted that more than 95% of rare earth materials and metals are mined or processed in China. For U.S. companies, China plays an indispensable role in the production of rare earth metals and pharmaceutical raw materials. We have no choice but to rely on China. More than 400 kilograms of rare earth metals are required to produce the best American F-35 fighter jet. Without Chinese exports of rare earth metals, it would be difficult for these weapons companies to produce these weapons. 4 months later, Hayes unexpectedly called for cooperation with China, mainly because they are running out of rare earth metal supplies and cannot meet the demand caused by the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. China is not only the world's largest stockpile and export country for rare earths, but it is also an important rare earth recycling country. Most U.S. weapon suppliers, including Raytheon, use rare earths, which are mostly imported from China. In this case, if they leave China, it would mean giving up on rare earth materials. In addition, Raytheon's business in China would also suffer greatly. Hayes, Raytheon's CEO, said their civilian business also relies heavily on China, such as their subsidiaries Pratt & Whitney and Collins Aerospace, which have branches in China and have about 2,000 employees. Moreover, Raytheon is also involved in the development of Chinese large aircraft. In addition, annual trade between China and the United States reaches $500 billion, and the move could cause Raytheon to lose a significant number of orders and business opportunities, which would negatively affect its financial position. However, Raytheon's claim that it cannot do without mainland China is simply lip service devoid of any sincerity, since the company does not want to pay the fine. Experts point out that what Hayes needs to do now is not talk about separating, but to correct all the wrong behavior in the situation of admitting and paying the fine. The fine issued by the Chinese side cannot be circumvented by just a few words from Hayes. Raytheon must apologize, actively address the consequences of its mistakes, and voluntarily pay the fine. Otherwise, the relevant sanctions and penalties will not cease. China will not bully anyone, but it will never allow anyone to bully China. Anyone who violates China's interests must pay the price. This is China's principle. What do you think about it? Write your opinion in the comments.